Workplace Champions is made possible by Workday. Hello and welcome to Workplace Champions. This episode will be featuring the workforce insights and commentary of three finance leaders, including CFO Jonathan Carr of Armis, CFO Celine Duvatel of Checkout.com, and CFO Dan Fletcher of Planful. And once more, we're pleased to feature performance management guru Brett Knowles as our resident thought leader as we together seek to highlight the takeaways from our distinguished group of workplace champions. Brett Knowles joins us after this. In a world that's always changing, one thing never does. Your need to adapt, your need to evolve, your need to grow. That's why we built Workday, a single finance, HR, and planning system that can change as your needs change and evolve as the world evolves. To learn how Workday is helping mid-size organizations embrace the future with confidence, visit us at workday.com. Hi, it's Jack Sweeney, and I'm here with Brett Knowles, who's been out and about and traveling here and there. Brett, you asked if you could open our episode with a few thoughts about AI, and we're all ears. Tell what's on your mind. What would you like to share?
I've continued to be infatuated with what we're seeing in terms of AI, and in particular, GPT, right? So GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And if we take a look at the magic that Chat GPT has brought to the table, I finally managed to sort it out in my brain. So if you think about it, in the good old days, we would have data and we'd think, gosh, data is useless and I need to go make that into information. So and information is data that's sort of been processed, it's been organized, it's structured, but it's still pretty two-dimensional. Like someone needs to show up with some knowledge to take a look at that information and sort of analyze it and get it integrated into business plans. And so now that ends up with knowledge. And then the final step in this journey is understanding, which is the ability to apply that knowledge in different and new situations and contexts, right? So think about it. We got data, becomes information, becomes knowledge, becomes understanding. And the magic that we're seeing with ChatGPT is in the chat environment, language, it's moved to understanding, right? So it understands language and whatever the source data is. It understands the information. It's obviously got this bank of knowledge that it looks at. But now it's done that shift that computers didn't do before from knowledge into understanding. So you can ask it, questions like, write an iambic pentameter, a poem, and it can go do it because it understands language, understands poets, understands, and can bring those things together, which is understanding, which used to be the domain of management. What's interesting is one of the people that you interviewed this week said exactly that. I still think in the interviewing process, we need to have humans because they're the ones that understand what's going on. And the magic of ChatGPT is that now the domain of understanding is no longer just owned by us humans. That's the piece of magic that has subtly changed the context of these conversations, I think.
Well, let me share an experience that I think many of us have had in the last 90 days. It's been happening probably for the last 2 years. Increasingly, but I think it's accelerated in the last 90 days. And that is, and I'll use LinkedIn activity as an example. I've been on LinkedIn and have begun having been approached either by the messaging function or likes or comments and posts. And suddenly it occurs to me that I'm engaging with not a real person. but it's somebody who has so much understanding of what my past activity has been, and I keep on saying somebody. I actually think it's an AI function that's been added or targeting me to have a conversation. And I think many of us have had that experience, but certainly in the last recent months, and maybe there's just a growing awareness on all of our parts that AI is out there, it's watching, it's listening, it's collecting. And to your point, it's understanding. How am I doing? Am I close to your point?
Very close. I mean, so imagine this. Imagine, and I skip how we get here. So we end up with a bunch of OKRs for an organization, and then your GPT says, okay, based on those that North Star, here's how it cascades down to your department. Great. Now, based on what the department's current position is, and the employees, and how the employees are currently performing, and what their career plans are, and what their performance reviews have been, these are the capacity shortcomings that shortcomings you've got. Therefore, this is what the qualifications of candidates are. And by the way, I just went over there and took a look at LinkedIn. There are 8 people who've just left jobs that would fit that criteria, and 3 of them exhibit, characteristics X, Y, and Z. But then we take a look at the broader industry market, and here are some other people. And now it's going to bring together all this information that we know is out there and could be brought together, but it does it in an instant, right? So literally you go, here's my OKR, and it comes back, great, here are the people you need to hire. Here are the candidates. Here are the questions you should ask them, like the whole enchilada, or maybe it goes out and asks them themselves, like that bot that you were wondering about the other day.
Wow. You certainly are giving me some fertile ground to grow our conversations with finance leaders. I have to say, well, 2 points. One is conversations I've had this week, by the way, which will lend themselves to next month's episode of Workplace Champions, are very different from those 30 days ago. So there is an acceleration here with finance leaders being comfortable discussing AI and what's happening within their companies, and it's happening quickly. My second point would be that we've been having AI conversations really with finance leaders for the last several years, which is when we talk about the customer experience, they have applied AI to that world and they have garnered, as you described, that path from data to understanding is in place in many of these SaaS organizations. Now, will the finance leader take the next step with us and talk about some of what you just highlighted is underway within their companies, how they're going to use AI in all these different functions? That's a challenge I'd love to have and look forward to engaging finance leaders about. But I will tell you, the door opener or conversation starter is ChatGPT. I mean, for conversation purposes, what I've learned this week and last is just bring it up and ask them about it. And I know this goes again, you've told me, Jack, this is not just about ChatGPT. This is much broader, much broader.
Yeah. So my nudge to you and the listeners is that GPT is a family of types of tools, of which Chat GPT is one, and there are dozens and dozens of them. And the first area of focus seems to be on hiring because of all the issues we have around human capital and the consequences of bad hires and the cost to hire and so forth. So it seems to be an incredibly high focus for the GPT software world. And what it means is it makes our job of hiring for non-HR experts so much easier because a lot of the heavy lifting is taken care of for us, right? If you look at what I described in that scenario, it's identified the capacity gap, which used to be the job of the manager. It's identified what capacities are missing. It's identified what candidates would look like. It's identified who those candidates are. It's figured out what the questions are that you should be interviewing them about. Like all that work used to take, when I say used to, a week ago Tuesday, hours and hours of work, and was a very imprecise science, right? Because a GPT could even go, you shouldn't be hiring these, you might think these are three good candidates, but when I take a look at experience from your competitors and other industries, that doesn't appear to be the case. So now you don't have to learn by yourself or learn for yourself. That data is available. So let's say you're looking for a particular profile, hired by your competitor, and 6 months later, their profile on LinkedIn says available for opportunities. Or in other places, Monster or somewhere else, we find their resume kicking around. They're an unhappy employee. Like that's research that we used to rely on HR to do, but now gets done in an instant for you as you're just beginning to think about what you might do on the human capital side.
Do finance leaders have enough visibility to know when their hiring function is broken?
Well, it's interesting that becomes a question that comes to mind, right? Because what you're implying, first off, is process integrity to a certain extent is owned by the CFO, which it often is. And now how do I know if it's broken or not? Well, the sad part is you just go ask Chat GPT, is it broken? Right? You'd say, well, and it is sad. I mean, as I've been researching this AI stuff, you can actually use a tool like this to help set your strategy. So you should be able to say, okay, roughly this is what I want to do. Give me 5 scenarios. And then it gives you the 5 scenarios and say, okay, now here are the constraints. I only have access to this much capital. These are the regulations, whatever the constraints might be. Please prioritize those 5. And they'll prioritize them. Eventually, you go off and choose which one you might want, or you might even ask, the GPT to choose for you. But all those steps that we used to do as a manager. Now, the fun part is the things that we look for in decision making is consistency, right? When I think of understanding, the theory is if I understand a situation, I get consistency in how I would make those decisions. Well, the GPT people are saying to get the consistency in the current technology, what you do is you set up 3 or 4 different personas. So you say, okay, in the context of this conversation, I want to go hire a sales manager. Here are the candidates. GPT, please take a look at them through the eyes of a marketing expert and rank them. Then you go, okay, great. Now, through the eyes of a COO, take a look at the same 5 candidates and give me your priority. Okay, now take a look at it through the eyes of a quality manager and give me your. So at the leadership team, part of the consistency we get comes from having the different brains around the room. What's interesting with the GPT is you can tell it what mindset you want as it analyzes the data you put before. So if the data is about a candidate, I can begin to get that cross-functional perspective on that candidate. And I could even go through the video of interviewing that employee and have the GPT to also analyze a video based on those personas or those contexts. So your question about would a CFO know if their hiring process is broken, I almost wasn't kidding when I say, go ask the GPT, is it broken? Because what it's going to do is going to take a look at things like, turnover employees in the first 6 months, like are we hiring the right people? Productivity of onboarded employees, and all the stats that you'd love to look at, but might. And so part of it is these GPTs are helping organize the data themselves, so that we're not going through all those mechanics, and is looking at a much broader context, is looking at it 7 by 24. And you can actually assign it a role, whether I want it to be looking for abnormalities or whatever else. So the AI application or GPT application in hiring, you could see is particularly attractive in terms of the amount of hours that are consumed and the significance of the decisions that you're trying to make.
Interesting. I like the conversation we're having here. And as evidence, I haven't played any of our workplace champions clips this episode just yet. But I do want to continue with this. I want to once more attempt to throw some water on your AI fire burning so high. I want to be a doubter because I think in middle market companies, the HR function isn't prepared to take this next step. Many of them are stuck in the mud. They're using sort of dated approaches, and organizationally, they just don't operate in sort of a dynamic fashion. Now, the finance leader, the deeper their lines of sight go, they'll be able to see the real value of managing organizations in this way. But those lines of sight don't go don't go there at this place in time. So what we're talking about here is just not ready for prime time. It's just not the realities of what's in the workforce today. How would you respond?
Well, so to try to unpack that in several levels, and you said something about HR being stuck in the mud. I wouldn't necessarily say that, but I would say stereotypically that HR people chose HR because they love people, not numbers and systems. The people that love numbers and systems go into computer programming, they go into finance, they go into actuarial school. So your HR department might not be the one leading the charge into a chat GPT type environment, but not because they're stuck in the mud or anything. It's just that might not be their mindset. And it's a might thing, is just as typical personas are. There are always going to be significant exceptions to it. The second part is, why would a CFO be concerned? Well, if you wanted to dollarize it by the cost of not having people, just the huge gap that we have in almost every corporation, or dollarize the amount of time, the elapsed time, the opportunity cost between when a job is posted and when it gets filled. Or not when it gets filled, but when that person finally becomes productive. Because until then, it's still a cost. Or you want to dollarize the amount of time spent in hiring people, right? A lot of stats say the cost to North America business is about $3.6 billion a year. If I was walking along, even if I'm Bill Gates and I saw $3.6 billion on the sidewalk, I'd stoop over to pick it up. Like, it's a huge cost, not only opportunity cost, but real life capacity cost and real life dollar cost to the organization. So the CFO should be desperately concerned. And we should be concerned about nurturing the human capital in place. So this GPT is also going to tell us whether people are actually developing, are they, performing better, are they performing worse, and so on. Because, we've all been seeing situations where we've got an incumbent in a role, they're not really doing a great job, but there's no one else to go. And so we just leave them there. Now they're a blockage for someone else moving up the organization. And I'm never going to achieve the level I want to achieve because that particular person's like, we need visibility of those, and the GPT is going to find those for us pretty easily. And we put them on a development program, a personal improvement program. If they don't improve, I'm going to see it. If they don't improve at the right rate, like all these things that we know we should be monitoring, but we just don't have the capacity to do so. And none of the numbers and stats I'm bringing forward in this conversation are new, and none of them are not available inside the system. So we're not trying to create something new. When you implement a tool like SAP, it's often very painful because I'm looking for bills of materials that don't exist. I'm looking for routings that don't exist. This is all data that's sitting there. We just have not been using it.
Well, I know we're going to be circling back to ChatGPT in the not too distant future, but right now I'm going to tee up our first workplace champion, who is Jonathan Carr, CFO of Armis, a cybersecurity firm. Here's Jonathan.
Yeah, I think I've long been a believer, even prior to the CFO role, that talent is super important, and by that I mean making sure that you find the right people for your organization. And somebody who is great in another organization may not be the right one for this one. And I think that is important. And from a financial perspective, I'm also a believer that you find the right talent, that you reward your top performers, whether that's sales or finance or whatever the role may be. At the same time, if things aren't working, I'm a believer that you need to be open, you need to be transparent, you need to give that feedback, give people the opportunity to adjust or course correct. And then if it's not working, then you make the decision to, move on and try something new. I would say what has evolved mostly is, I think more about kind of world-class metrics around compensation a little bit more dynamically. And an example of that, for a salesperson, I might say, hey, for enterprise SaaS, I want commissions as a percentage of bookings to be X%. I know that's world-class. I know that's where I want to be. But I think since being in the seat, there's a bit of a balance. And I think it's really going into, one, what does my business tell me about what I can get out of that? And by that, I mean, I might be okay paying a high CAC if I've got excellent retention, I've got expansion potential, and I can get that return over time. And more importantly, I might be okay doing that today. I may not be okay doing that in 2 years from now. And so really thinking about, where is your business today? Of your investors, what do they care about? Do they want their return in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? Are they after the long, the 100-year company? Really understanding what matters and what stage you're in, to me, influences just how aggressively I'm willing to compensate for certain activities. And that's going to evolve. So that, I guess that's what's new to me, is I really view this seat as super important, super strategic. And when I say yes or no, it has the ability to influence the outcome of the company's success pretty meaningfully.
Just a few bio notes on Jonathan Carr. He came up through the ranks at SurveyMonkey in the FP&A realm. And interestingly, he had a philosophy he shared with us way back on episode, is it 852? His comment that I'll repeat here was, you have to find things that you have absolutely no idea how to do, because it's those things that'll help you to grow exponentially. So throughout his career, he has taken that path. He has actually jumped into roles that he was not familiar with. And again, he experienced this sort of accelerated learning experience. Anyway, you want to learn more about that? That's back on episode 852. But right now, Brett, what did you make of what Jonathan shared?
Yeah, well, I thought, John, what I picked out from the early part of Jonathan's conversation, I'm glad that you added your insight on the part that was not included about his career of sort of trial and experimenting to move forward, because I really liked his early point about, we need to give employees feedback and then coach them and, help them succeed or help them move on. So that begins the theme of the day, which is all about how is it we help people move forward. Beyond that, launching us into the theme, he did talk about this sort of world-class compensation metrics. And the part that he said that he thought was most interesting is that the compensation structure should match the investor's needs. And that's an equation I have not heard before, but I think is remarkably brilliant. And what he means from that is, if I've got an investor that's looking for very short-term return, then my compensation system might be better suited about getting short-term gains, like quarter-end compensation and that kind of thing, as opposed to a 5-year plan. And the idea that as my investor portfolio evolves, so should my compensation. So the compensation, as you said, is dynamic, not only based on what the market requires and what's needed for the position, but also what's needed by the investors and what they're paying for. And that's a twist I hadn't heard before. Now, the embellishment of that is when you get it wrong. So an example would be, if you have a strategy that says we're going to become the trusted advisor for our customers, but your sales rep is compensated on quarter-end sales. So as you're coming to the end of the quarter, the rep's not going to focus on being trusted advisor because that's not going to pay off in sales to hit this quarter's quota and bonus. The sales rep's going to focus on what can I do to close this job, and that might, or close this deal, and that might be against that trusted advisor role. So then I've got a disconnect between the strategy or what the investors are looking for, trusted advisor, and what the compensation system's paying us for, which is quarter end sales. And that's an example, I think, of what Jonathan was talking about. And of course, his comment was it directly impacts the company's success. And you can see in the example I gave you how that's exactly the case.
Well, Brett, due to the fact we're a little bit behind here, I'm going to jump forward and I'm going to share the next clip. This is Celine Dufatel, CFO and now COO of Checkout.com.
So, having grown up at McKinsey, where people were the product, right? People were the service that we were bringing to our clients. I've always grown up thinking that who we hire, who we develop, how we coach, how we develop talent is the most important thing that we do as leaders. And so I devote a lot of my time to that. That includes spending a lot of time hiring and bringing in the right talent, spending a lot of time coaching and developing the talent. And my philosophy has always been to surround myself with people who complement my skills. Ultimately, we're a team, we win as a team, and that requires complementary skill sets. So it's knowing what you're strong at, knowing what you're less strong at, and building the best team. I also, I ask of my leaders to maintain a very high bar in terms of the talent that they bring into the organization, because ultimately I think that will have an outsized impact on the results that we can drive as an organization and the growth of the organization. We recruited a lot of talent over the course of the pandemic. It was a period of hyper growth for Checkout. Today we have a hybrid model, so we're back in the office 2 days a week. We strongly believe in collaboration as part of innovation and the work and the quality of things and products and services that we deliver to our merchants. And so that's kind of the model that we've adopted.
Well, again, that was Celine Dufatel of Checkout.com. Brett, I don't know if you are aware of this, but Celine was once the partner over McKinsey and Company's financial services practice. I believe she spent nearly a decade at McKinsey and Company. It's a little unusual and quite a pedigree for any finance leader. What did you make of what Celine shared?
So what's interesting about her is that whole perspective about collaboration. So one of the dilemmas that we have, especially in the finance world, is we tend to only speak to finance people. Like we think we have a special language and a different way of looking at the organization. And that's both gives us some efficiencies, but also some deficiencies in not understanding the rest of the organization, not understanding how to convert what they do into what we do and vice versa. So I thought that whole collaboration thing was important, and her perspective about doing a good hire, but then also focusing on developing the people that were there. And so and most people, when they get into that conversation about talent development, it's all about training. Her comment, as soon as she started talking from her heart about talent development, it was about collaboration, right? There's a meme that says knowledge is created socially. In other words, if we want to do that conversion I talked about before from information into knowledge, I need to bounce my ideas off other people, get other ideas back. And that's what converts information into knowledge. And that's what she was focusing in on. So I thought that was a big positive and speaks a lot to her organization's perspective on developing people.
Okay. Well, again, we're going to continue to move things along here, and we're going to feature our next workplace champions, who is Dan Fletcher, CFO of Planful.
to the very pointed question you gave me, will finance be more important in labor considerations? Although that word, a lot of people, talent considerations, right? Whichever you choose. No, I don't think so. I still think other groups, the people, HR team, the CEO are more important. That's not an insult to finance. Certainly finance plays a key role in compensation. But what I will tell you as a leader of my teams, and I have noticed this is not unique to my team, you become much more interested in engagement. You use the word and happiness and fit in the org when you don't see people every day. Things slip. I think we're beyond the point now where we all understand there are benefits to remote or hybrid models. You drop the commute out, tend to live healthier lifestyles, perhaps get more time with family and friends, and that's good for mental health. And we also, I think, are beyond the point where we understand certain things that are lost in a 100% remote model around culture, around engagement, in particular for junior ranks, around the ability to learn by seeing, to learn by hearing, to learn from random interactions in the hallway or the classic water cooler. And so I think we're all adapting now to finding the right balance and how to recover some of those things we've lost while preserving some of the things we've gained. And I do think in our example, it came down to, if you're saving budget on a big office, then redeploy, reinvest in getting people together, getting people on planes. And we do a great company kickoff that's coming up in just 2 weeks that our people leader, Mel, who's fantastic, invests a ton of time and energy in getting buttoned up and getting everybody to kick off the year together. And that's the key word, physically together, to get swept up in the excitement about what we're doing for our customers and why we're doing it. And then that's where you get a bunch of those random interactions. And this is where you'll find things like someone in my org, a junior accountant, for example, on the AP side, gets to spend time with the CMO at the bar, at the hotel. And next time that CMO is griping about an invoice not being paid, and they're going to someone in AP that they don't know, there's already a bond and understanding there. And they can skip past the part where they're butting heads and get to the part where that vendor was signed up on really, really cushy payment terms to that vendor. And we'd love to have you go talk to them about something that's more commercial for us. And that is just one example of the interactions that can occur in person. Even though you all go back to a remote model after that, you've gained something that had been lost, I think, in the depth of the pandemic.
I thought Dan's whole conversation was incredibly interesting, right? And just what I took from it, the recap, in case you weren't paying attention, I heard, all about, being concerned about these invisible issues like happiness and engagement, fit in the organization. Then he said some interesting points. He said, these are particularly difficult when we don't see people every single day. Good point. And he says, this new way of working, this idea of people working from home or mixed mode, the pluses are about lifestyle and being able to see your friends and family and so on. But there's negatives that come along with it too. And the negatives are things like, how do we build our culture? How do we build engagement? How do we sort of learn by exposure? And my segue to that for a second is, there's a difference between complicated problems and complex problems. So a complicated problem is, how do I build a car? Like complicated, a lot of parts and so on. But when I'm building a car, if I have a gear that doesn't fit, I write up a new procedure on how to make that gear so now it's more consistent and it always fits. That's a complicated problem. A complex problem, says the man who just came back from a ski holiday with grandchildren, is if a 6-year-old has a problem on day 1, you can solve it with a lollipop. If the same problem happens on day 2, the lollipop might not be day 2's solution. It might be something different, playing on the iPhone or something or the other. But the net is complicated. Complex is different than complicated. Complex, people, egos, strategy, hiring people, those things I can't solve with another standard operating procedure, right? So a broken part on a car, standard operating procedure. A broken employee, there is no standard operating procedure. You can't give them a lollipop and hope it solves the problem. And so the things that he says that you lose in this new environment are all complex problems. Culture, I can't fix that with a lollipop or a flowchart. Engagement, I can't fix that with a lollipop or a flowchart. Learning by exposure, I can't fix that. And so what ends up happening, though, is we try to solve those problems with standard operating procedures. Right? We've all been to organizations where they said, oh, we've got a culture project underway and it'll be done by June. Well, that works for fixing up the standard operating procedure on manufacturing the car. It doesn't work on fixing up a culture. And so what the can of worms that Dan opened up is, the advantages on the employee side, lifestyle, family, are disadvantages on the company side, culture, engagement, and learn by exposure. And those aren't things that we can easily do. Now, the solution he gave us was interesting, was things like creating events, creating monuments where those things can happen. So he went into a story of the annual meeting and so on. So I think what we need to be mindful of is back to the theme of the day, which is about hiring, retaining, developing, engaging employees. We need to recognize that there are some gains that the employee has from this work from home, but there's some downsides that the organization experiences that aren't fixed by a flow chart or a new procedure. We need to fix social problems with social tools, such as this example of an event. And I thought, it was an extremely well-skilled thought conversation that he took us on that ended up with a crescendo about why these events are so important. The statistic I dropped in the last podcast is a recent Forrester report says 87% of people leave an organization because A, they don't feel connected to the organization's purpose, or they aren't learning in their current position. 87%, which means there's only 13% left over for people being mad about their boss or not being happy with their compensation. So this engagement thing is super, super important. And the employee feels it as well as the company. And so learning number one is be sensitive and get out your spidey senses to see if there's a deterioration in your culture or a deterioration in that engagement level. Then the second part of that is do something about it. That's not a flowchart. Don't launch a culture project or employee engagement project, but solve social problems with social solutions, like creating that event and creating situations where you force the culture to be exhibited, where you force engagement to occur to make up for the fact that we don't meet in the hallways and at the proverbial water cooler. I think that's, to me, what the big lesson here is.
So what do you think are the takeaways from these three commentaries of our workplace champions?
First off, the connection between these speakers, I hypothesized, was more about how is it we retain employees. And Jonathan talked about, obviously good feedback, but also having a compensation system that's better strategically linked. Celine talked to us about that collaboration across departments. And Dan talked to us about, nurturing the culture and engagement by setting up, special events that force those things to happen. So I think our three CFOs have given us, three parts of what the answer looks like. I don't think the answer's in any one of them. I think all three are important lessons for all of us to bring back to our organizations.
So I think we've all arrived now in this strange period, this post-COVID period, where the tech sector appears to be having something of a recession, a reaction to overhiring maybe during the pandemic. Companies got bloated. Companies didn't know how to stop hiring, it seems like. So talent, and we're seeing how clumsy workforce cuts can be and how painful they can be. But at the same time, this new technology has arrived and is being talked about widely. And you get a sense that many businesses are finding themselves at an inflection point of some kind. Your thoughts?
I would unpack that in two ways. One is we've all seen those transformation curves. So think of in the 1900s where everyone's riding horses and manufacturing buggy whips, and you see a car go by. At a certain point in time, you've got to transfer from that horse and buggy to the car. And the trick is, when's the right time to leap technologies? And we all have lots of stories when you leap the technology too soon. We all have stories where people leap technology too late. I think what Chat GPT has done is helped us. That stuff has been emerging for a while. It just made it clear that it's getting to the point where we all need to worry about jumping the technology. Got it? So that's the first part of your comment. Like, when's it time to make the jump? It's always easier to make the jump if the platform you're on is burning or the ship you're on is sinking. And so the second part of your story is there's a bunch of corrections going on as a result of COVID, right? So some research indicates we hung on to people too long. And what we saw in the first part of 2023 with the tech layoffs wasn't so much as a layoff, is just correcting for the fact that we didn't allow people to leave for the last couple of years. We did everything we possibly could to retain them because we were just concerned about the reverberations of working from home and COVID and everything else. Now we've figured out what that new normal looks like. We can now calculate what our surplus human capacity is and make those course corrections. There hasn't been any systemic changes in business volumes yet. Now, it might be, but this is a bunch of currently looks like corrective action for stuff that's going on before. So now that if I join the two stories together, we've got to jump that technology. We all can now see AI is going to be here sooner or later. The question is, when is that gap small enough that we can jump, but not so small that all my competitors now have a competitive advantage because they're already there? And what's my impetus to make that jump, which comes from things like this course correction or disruption that's going on. So that becomes an incentive to make you jump over a larger gap that you might have jumped before. That's how I would sort of unpack your observation.
Well, I'm afraid we had a lot of unpacking this episode. I'll stick to asking the questions from now on, I promise. Mr. Brett Knowles, thank you for joining us.
Okay, my friend. Catch you later.
Hi, it's Jack. If you haven't yet subscribed to Workplace Champions, you'll find us on Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify. If you like the show, please recommend it to a friend. Thanks for listening to Workplace Champions, a CFO Thought Leader production.